Mega Man! One of my favorite franchises of all time. I grew up playing Mega Man. And when Mega Man 9 and 10 came out, I didn't even know until years afterwards. And I didn't even get them until fairly recently with the Legacy collections, which I'm glad I waited because those come with the DLC. And then Mega Man 11 came out, and I'm just like, oh shoot, there's more. And I was finally able to get that. But in between Mega Man 10 and Mega Man 11, there was Mighty Number 9. Keiji Inafune left Capcom and formed his own company, Concept, and they released their own spiritual successor to Mega Man called Mighty Number 9. And for years and years, this game eluded me. I really wanted to see it. I really wanted to play it. Now, of course, even after Mega Man 11 and 9 and 10, for that matter, when those came out, I still didn't touch them until years after they were released. But with Mighty Number 9, I really wanted to give that one a try because I remember hearing that it was like really bad. And I don't know why. I don't understand why. And so today I want to test that. I want to see how bad Mighty Number 9 really was. And to take things further, I want to compare it to Mega Man 11. So let's do it, right? Let's figure out, is Mega Man 11, how much better is Mega Man 11 to Mighty Number 9? How do they stack up? Let's find out. So I guess I'll start with the story, since this will probably be one of the shorter parts. If I'm going to be honest, I don't really play these games for the story. I only really care for the story insofar as how it pushes me to the next level. But generally speaking, unless there's something like about a character that I really like or really dislike, I'm not really going to be that interested in the story. There are some exceptions with that. Story-driven games, obviously, like Dokusei. I mean, you don't play that for anything else but the story. But like here, this is more of a gameplay-centric kind of game, which, to be honest, is all I really need from a game like this. So the story is just kind of like window dressing. Although, to be fair, there is effort put into telling an interesting story that isn't just like the typical Mega Man fare that we've kind of grown used to with, Dr. Wily and the fake out villain and, plots and everything like that don't really mean anything because Wily's obviously the real villain behind everything, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it became a meme. They literally memed on it in Mega Man 9. So it's kind of like a moot point. So the direction they took this story was actually pretty interesting. And there's actually a bait for a sequel here. Of course, it never got the sequel, but, it is there. And, the characters have a certain history. And, there's some mystery surrounding the origins of Beck, the character you play as, and Dr. White, who honestly is my least favorite character in this game. Honestly, here's the thing, okay? There's being confident. There's there's knowing that you're good at something, but then there's Dr. White, who believes that he's the most perfect guy in the world. Everything that's great came from him. That's how what he believes. And it's funny because this whole mess that is happening with the world, I forgot the name of the main villain, but it's his creation because he said it himself. He programmed the robot's main directive to be to constantly grow and evolve, and giving it assimilation powers and not knowing. I mean, have you seen Star Trek, the Next Generation? Or obviously I haven't, but I know what the Borg is, all right? Anyway, I guess maybe that's sort of like the point this game is trying to make. Maybe there's a satirical element here that the good guys aren't really all that good and the bad guys are bad, but maybe they also have a point. Maybe it's going for a more nuanced thing, but in a game that is trying to be like Mega Man, where it's very clear what's good and evil, it's kind of, I don't know. But at the same time, I get it from a gameplay standpoint. The gameplay is actually consistent with the story, those themes. So, I mean, if that's what they're going for, I think I can understand. But at the same time, it doesn't change the fact that I just cannot stand Dr. White and his hubris and just no. As far as the other characters are concerned, Dr. Blackwell, the corporate guy, we have Dr. Sanda, I think his name is, who is, I think, supposed to be like an anti-Dr. Light. He looks kind of like Dr. Light, except younger, and he's considerably less good in terms of just being... This guy is like he's a scaredy cat, basically. And then he has Call, which is his own robot, who's supposed to be like this kind of, how do I say, primitive design, I suppose. Obviously, Call is nowhere near as advanced as Dr. Dr. White's own Mighty Numbers, especially Beck. I don't know, just the way his voice acting goes. He just sounds so arrogant, and honestly, you look at his coronavirus-shaped hairstyle, and you just want to punch it, honestly. But, okay. I know I've talked a lot of crap about Dr. White, but the story as a whole is fine. The way Beck gets along with the other Mighty Numbers is actually pretty cool. I like that. There's this camaraderie that they have when they're all working together towards the end. That's pretty neat to see. And the way their personalities sort of change after you've decorrupted them is pretty cool too. I don't know. I like it. And the voice acting, since we're talking about story, might as well talk about voice acting too. The voice acting is sometimes it's kind of forgettable. Or sometimes it's okay. It's like serviceable. And sometimes it's so bad it's good. It's just amazing. Especially the Mighty Number who has the electricity. That one gets me every time. I absolutely love that. And I'll play a clip for it so that you know what I'm talking about.
Yes! The power! So much delicious power! Oh, it's intoxicating! I feel dizzy! Whee!
But man, that is a fantastically cheesy performance. You can't help but to give it a little bit of praise for how so bad it's good it is. Yeah, generally in the voice acting department it's fine. I guess it does what it communicates. It's fine in terms that it communicates dialogue in a comprehensible way. Let's go with that. And the story as a whole is just good enough to be able to push you to the next level. And, it doesn't have you really thinking that much or caring that much. But hey, you get to make some new friends along the way. And what else is this? It's about other than just, the friends we made along the way. Am I right? Am I right? So Mighty Number 9 gets a lot of flack for its graphical presentation. Pizza explosions. We have Pizza Tower, but we all know the first real Pizza Tower came from Mighty Number 9. So, a lot of people like to make fun of the pizza explosions, but I'm gonna cut Mighty Number 9 a little bit of slack here. The reason why is because it's okay. So this might sound like a cop out, and it might sound like I'm making excuses for it, but when you look at Japanese games that come out from kind of middle-sized developers for consoles like PS4 or Switch or something like that, and I'm talking mostly about like games like Hyperdimension, Neptunia, or like those, they're not really the best looking games ever. They kind of look maybe a little bit lesser, right? They don't look as good. And I mean, they're fine though. Like the character models are good. There's enough detail so that obviously, things don't look terrible, but at the same time, it's not gonna look like God of War or the newest, I don't know, the newest PS5 walking simulator to come. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean. It's not gonna look like one of the big like Sony exclusives or anything like that. It's not gonna. They kind of like have kind of mid graphics, but like that's okay, right? I mean, that's just like kind of the style that they go for, and given that Mighty Number 9 is an independent, it's a game developed in Japan by an independent developer. I mean, you can only expect so much, right? And, they have to, be within their means in terms of what they can realistically achieve. And so when you look at what we got, I mean, obviously, I hope it was hyperbolic when Johnny said that it was like upscaled PS1 graphics for the Dreamcast. That's a bit much. I would never go so far as to say that, even hyperbolically, but I would hope that that's what he was doing, because this would not work on a PS1 at all, or a Dreamcast for that. But like, I mean, yeah, it looks kind of behind the times a little bit, but there's a little bit of a charm to that there, I think. This 2.5D trying to, have these 3D models and having like these big worlds. I mean, we can talk all day about those big pizza explosions, but there are some good explosion effects in there also. It's not all pizza all the time, although I do like myself a nice pizza. Actually, I really could use a pizza. I keep thinking about the pizza. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make here is that there's kind of an aesthetic that goes with these kind of mid-tier non-AAA Japanese games that I think a lot of people are kind of ignoring in terms of graphical presentation. And while I do understand that I'm playing this well after its release, where glitches have long since been patched out and, all that fun stuff, I understand that, I'm playing a superior version of this game than people were when this launched, but in its state that it's in now, that it's been in since it was last updated or patched or whatever, honestly, this game isn't half bad looking. I mean, to be fair, I'm not particularly, picky about graphical presentation, right? Don't really care about that much unless it really, really gets in the way of stuff or whatever, it hinders something. Then generally speaking, or it's a hindrance when it's not supposed to be, right? Then yeah, there's a problem. But with Mighty Number 9, I never get really the sense that it's terrible, right? I mean, it is of its time. For me, I always think about, this being on a Wii U game, even though I know it wasn't just on the Wii U, it was on Xbox One and PS4 and PC at the time. But of all the platforms that existed, the Wii U was kind of like, the weakest, so to speak, in quotes, right? And so because of that, they had to keep that in mind when making this game. And so, of course, keeping the Wii U in mind, you look at something like Sonic Lost World and its graphical presentation, and then you suddenly begin to realize that, this game is kind of like on par with some other games that were coming out at around that time. And so because of that, I cut it a little bit of slack. I really don't think I think honestly it looks better than some games that were coming out or that had come out, like Sonic Lost World. The graphical presentation of that game, I'm just not over, I guess. But Mighty Number 9, I think, is a better looking game than that. Maybe. I don't know. I'll have to go back. But from what I remember, especially the Wii U version. But, I don't know. I think Mighty Number 9 is perfectly fine. I mean, is it aged? Definitely. It hasn't really stood the test of time as well. But at the same time, I mean, it's fine. I mean, everything's going to age eventually, right? That nothing is on the cutting edge forever. I mean, nothing ever is. So, it wasn't trying to be cutting edge. It was just trying to be a 2.5D game. And, I mean, we can talk about the art style, I suppose. I mean, Beck's COD piece is impressive. But yeah, when it comes to graphical presentation, I know I keep saying that over and over again. It's fine. I actually like it. Especially on the highway scene when there's the sunset. I think that's really cool. Kind of a nice cyberpunk vibe to it. I don't know. I think it's all right. I won't lambast it as much as other people. But again, I wasn't a Kickstarter backer. I didn't put money into this up front. So maybe my perspective is a little bit different than someone who may have been a backer. So yeah, there's that. Keep that in mind. So from a gameplay point of view, Mighty Number 9 isn't exactly a clone of a Mega Man game, like the classic Mega Man games. Of course, one could argue that it is pretty similar. However, there is something that separates Mighty Number 9 from its classic Mega Man counterpart that really gives it its own flavor. Now, it is an action platformer. You do navigate platforming challenges, and you do have an arm cannon, and you blast through enemies, get to the end boss, fight them, get their power, use that power on the next boss as their weakness, rinse and repeat 8 times before going to the final stages. All right, fine. However, there is a difference, and it's really driven by the story, because the story is all about this robot AI thing going crazy, assimilating everything into being what it is. And Mighty Number 9 is sort of like a refinement of that technology, and which is why he's the only one who can't go berserk. Because here's the thing, the robots that you're fighting are going berserk because of this robot assimilating them to help it take over the world, basically. Mighty Number 9 has to save them, and he's the only one who has his own assimilation power that can snap them out of it. And that's the key thing here. You don't kill your enemies in this game. There's no blasting enemies and making them explode into bits and, that's the end, move on to the next one. It doesn't do that. We'll get there. But yeah, that's not the goal here. And so instead you assimilate them, and you assimilate them by using this dash power. When you damage an enemy to a certain point, you dash into them, and Beck pretty much slaps them. He pimp slaps them. And that kind of brings them back. They're back to normal. And the game strongly incentivizes you do this with all enemies, and you have no choice but to do it for the bosses. So, there is that. So, because here's the thing. You can kill enemies, the smaller enemies. You can. But they take so many hits that it's really not worth it. It destroys the pace of the game. And so the best way to do it is to just assimilate them. As soon as they start glowing, you get them. And the faster you can successfully assimilate these guys, the bigger the payoff is. Mostly for your rank, I suppose. But one of the interesting things about the lower enemies is that they actually also give Beck power-ups. It's not something I really hear talked about a lot, but you actually get upgrades, temporary ones. And the idea is you get these upgrades, and these can be anything from a shield, like an overshield that sort of reduces the knockback you receive when you get hit. There's a power-up that allows you to shoot through things, through enemies, so that you can kind of keep your combo going. And then there's one that helps you speed up, makes you move faster, and all that fun stuff. And I think there are a couple more that I'm forgetting, but those are the three that I remember, and they are really useful. The problem is that they're temporary. They're on a meter, and they do deplete over time. So the challenge is, if you want to take on that challenge, is to kind of perpetuate those by flying through the stage as fast as possible to be able to maintain those power-ups. Although sometimes you might want to strategically lose those power-ups, which in a way is kind of a cool idea, And I think also, because this is something that I didn't notice until a little bit later into my gameplay, but Beck in stock form without any of the temporary power-ups, his blaster can actually reach the other side of the screen from where he is. It doesn't quite reach to the end of the screen like a typical Mega Man game would. I guess save for Mega Man X5 and 6, since you can't shoot through walls in that game, but that's a different beast. In this game, it's more like Metroid, like stock Metroid on the NES, where the blaster only goes a certain length and then it just kind of dissipates and you have to upgrade it. Beck is kind of the same way here, and because of that, one of the nice things about the upgrades is if you especially can get the blaster upgrade, you can actually shoot across the screen and shoot through enemies, of course, as I said before. And these power-ups can actually be pretty helpful. And if you can chain your assimilation, you can actually maintain those power-ups for longer. And that's part of the challenge of the game. The game wants you to go fast. Now, one of the slight complaints I have about the dash is that it's not really well communicated that you can actually do a duck dash sort of thing, because there's no duck in this game. You can't duck down like you can in, say, Mega Man X5. I know I keep bringing that game up, but yeah, like that. That's the game that introduced ducking. This game doesn't have that, but you can duck dash. And of course, it doesn't ask you to do that a lot. I think maybe only a couple of times. But I remember the first time I ran into that in my most recent playthrough, playing through it for the first time in 3 years. I found myself wondering, wait, what? And then a message just popped up saying, try doing a duck dash. And I'm like, oh, you can do that? And then I died because there are instant death spikes there. But then I tried it again and it worked. But yeah, it's that's something. Communication is really probably the biggest issue. If we're going to talk about weapons here, the weapons in this game have I don't want to say strange, but some weapons have more utility purposes. Like, they can be used in a more utilitarian way than others. There's some weapons that you can use to better navigate certain parts of levels. In fact, some are required to navigate certain parts of levels, and others you might never touch ever. And that kind of balancing is just kind of strange. I don't want to say strange, but it's a little. I mean, I guess it's typical for Mega Man. I mean, I know a lot of people really like to go in depth about the how useful these the weapons that you get from the bosses are in the Mega Man games. I'm not really that into it. I always just use the stock, buster power, just like the stock blaster. I don't know. Maybe I'm stupid for that, but yeah. But it's a little bit disorienting in a way. I remember my first ever playthrough 3 years ago, for example. I was in the first part of the final stage, and there was this obstacle where there were just instant kill hazards everywhere. Conveyor belts and crates that are threatening to push you off into the spikes, and this ledge is just slightly too high to jump onto, and I'm just thinking, how do I get up here? I couldn't, for the life of me, figure out how until I saw someone play through it, and I realized that you can equip a weapon and it does something completely different than what I knew it could do. And that kind of caused me to just rage quit the game for 3 years, literally. And as ridiculous as that sounded, I was kind of like, why? Why is it asking? Why didn't it tell me this? When you get weapons, it doesn't tell you what they do, or like how to use them. You're just kind of left to figure it out yourself. I guess it's not like a completely bad thing, but other Mega Man games in the past have sort of at least demonstrated, and I think like Mega Man 6 was one of them, or something, where like there's an animation demonstrating what these weapons do, how you can use them. So when I saw that you can use that to gain the helicopter to gain a little bit of a higher footing, I was just like, what? I never knew about that. You can just hold it down, and okay, I wish I knew that. But that's just how things go sometimes, I suppose. That's probably my biggest complaint. As far as the boss fights, one of the interesting things about the boss fights is going back to the assimilation thing. You take their health down in segments, basically. Once you hit a certain threshold of damage, you actually can't damage the enemy anymore. Instead, you have to sort of like solidify that damage that you did, if that makes sense. So, for example, let's say you're fighting a boss and the damage increments is in quarters, right? When you take out the first quarter of his health, it doesn't matter how much more damage you do to them, it's not going to register. They're going to be glowing the color that they will be, so that you have to assimilate them. And that will indicate that damage is done permanently. If the assimilation wears off, their health will slowly start to come back. And so you really have to be careful about that. You really have to pay attention. Most of the time, it's not that big a deal, but there are a couple of bosses where it's kind of difficult to discern whether or not they're in the ready to assimilate state, and it can be a little bit tricky in kind of an annoying way. It's I guess where the use of color, I wouldn't necessarily say, well, I guess it it's an inherently graphical issue, but it's not like it's not like the well, yeah, I don't know. It could use some more distinction, I guess, in my personal opinion. But I mean, it doesn't make the game unplayable or anything. It just makes things kind of tricky, especially with that final boss, because it just so happens that the color the boss isn't too far off from the color it glows when it's ready to have, the pimp slap done to it. One of the interesting things about Mighty Number 9 also is that there are no energy tanks, so you have to go through and beat all the bosses in one health bar. And if you're used to Mega Man games where you have energy tanks you can kind of fall back on, not so much here. It's definitely back to that, I don't know, Mega Man 1 kind of ordeal, or even Mega Man 2, honestly. But it's doable. It's very doable. It's definitely a trial and error, memorizing the patterns and kind of going along with the rhythm of what's happening. In my opinion, this style of game has always been about rhythm, and there's like a musicality to the way you navigate levels and boss fights and how you move and interact with them. And, because of that, I think that's part of the challenge, I suppose. Of course, you can cheese everything. Almost everything. The stages, you could just dash through like the majority of them, right? I mean, for whatever that's worth. Personally, I don't do that, but it's an option for those who decide that they just don't care. But as far as like power-ups or items are concerned, there's no marketplace. There's nothing that you can buy to enhance your powers or to upgrade armor or anything like that. All the upgrades are done in the stage, either from assimilating energies or enemies, not energies, assimilating enemies. And if you die enough times, a little Eddie kind of robot will appear, and he'll give you like all of the power-ups. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not useful. They're the exact opposite of useful in terms of the context of the stage kind of messes with your gameplay. But yeah, it's fine. Honestly, you don't miss the power-ups after a while. That said, there are a lot of beginners traps in this game, and a little bit annoyingly enough, there's a game over system, lives and game overs. And because of that, there is a little bit of a, you think you got it down, and then you make one dumb mistake somewhere, and then you die, right? And you get a game over, and you're like, no, I know what I did wrong. Just give me one more chance. But that's how the cookie crumbles sometimes. Something that's a little bit clunky with switching weapons is in the Mega Man games that I'm used to, you can use the shoulder buttons to just hot swap, right? To just sort of quickly flick through the weapons so that you can get the one that you want really quickly. Or at the very least, go to the start menu and do that. But with Mighty Number 9, the way it wants you to do it is you press the left bumper and then you just keep pressing it until you highlight the power-up that you want. Then you press Y. And what's nice about that is when you press Y again, you go back to your normal form, and you can just kind of switch between those two constantly, very easily. But it only works with one weapon, of course. And so if you want to change the weapon you're swapping to, you have to go back, and sometimes you'll press that bumper and you'll try to scroll down, and it'll be right, the next weapon will be the one that you want, and then it'll scroll twice, and so it'll skip it, and then you got to do it all over again, go down the list. And that happened to me more times than I would have liked it to. It can't. I'm using a DualSense controller, and it's good as new, so I can't imagine it's that. It must be misreading my inputs or something, because like it didn't drive me crazy. It wasn't like unlivable, but at the same time, I just want to switch to a weapon. Map it to like the if they. I mean, I don't know if it's that simple to just map it to the triggers or something, so you can flick through them easily. I'm not sure, but that would have been useful, at least for me, kind of Mega Man X style, I suppose. But as far as other things, like, there's no charge shot, which is another thing, so you have to be really careful about your aim. The weapons have varying utility, as I said before. Honestly, as far as the control, or yeah, let's talk about the controls too. As far as the controls are concerned, they work well. I prefer the D-pad for 2D games. It just feels like there's more precision. I don't really need the analog control. A is to jump, and X is to shoot, as it should be. Everything is right where it ought to be, and I liked that aspect. It's fantastic. It controls exactly the way I want it to. One of the interesting things, though, that I noticed is that Beck will actually kind of stumble a little bit. If you jump down a ledge or something and you land on a lower platform, he'll actually stumble forward. It's kind of reminiscent of that little extra like slide that Mega Man used to have in the really early like NES games, Mega Man 1, 2, and I think 3. Maybe not 3, but definitely in 1 and 2. I used to call it, as a kid, I used to call it the slide effect. But yeah, and so they kind of bring that back here, almost, and the way they animate it too, it almost looks like he's doing parkour. It's really interesting, and it can be a little bit nerve-wracking too, especially when the platform you're landing on is kind of narrow. The way he stumbles forward is like, oh wait, stop! But I've never died because of that, so that's the thing. However, one thing that really does put me off is that every time it seems that Beck lands on a platform from jumping onto it from below or above, doesn't matter, he will make this like grunt sound as if he's taking damage, and it's just like from a gameplay standpoint, it's like, okay, where's the enemy, how did I get shot? So that's a little bit of a that's kind of a nitpick, honestly, but it does sort of distract me a little bit. Another thing, too, that Beck can do is he can actually grab onto ledges and kind of hang off of them. And that's necessary in a boss fight and in some platforming challenges also. So you have to be careful about that. But luckily, it's pretty easy to trigger. You just kind of jump and, it's honestly, it's second nature. Is second nature? It's intuitive. It's extremely intuitive to do. It's just not something maybe you would expect from something that's considered a Mega Man clone. But yeah, that is necessary in some places. And the way it's utilized is kind of sparingly, but also kind of adds a variety and a certain level of strategy to the way you approach certain boss fights and platforming challenges. So that's pretty cool. But aside from all of that, I think that's about it. I think I covered everything I wanted to with Mighty Number 9 in terms of controls and gameplay. It works very similarly to a Mega Man game, but the key feature here is the assimilation mechanic. I cannot stress that enough. It's not about killing enemies, because these guys aren't really enemies, they're your friends. Even the final boss is your friend. They're just innocent robots going haywire, and you need to help them rather than destroy them. And that's really like the key thing, and it's very plot driven. And honestly, I feel like I the fact that you can't have the mechanic without the story, and you can't have the story without the mechanic. Honestly, I think that integration that is really seamless in my opinion. And honestly, I think that that's a really cool way to incorporate story into gameplay just inherently. And I have to applaud sort of whoever was behind that idea. I kind of have to applaud it because, I mean, at first I kind of joked when I talked about it with other people. I'm like, yeah, it's just one giant virtue signal because Beck doesn't kill his enemies. He just stuns them and saves them and he brings them back. Mega Man's bad guy. Like, all that stuff. But like, there's more to it than just that. And, when you're able to seamlessly integrate story into gameplay, I personally, I think there's something artful about that. So yeah, good on Concept for coming up with that concept. So, as far as the music is concerned for Mighty Number 9, I actually, believe it or not, I actually really do like the pan flute opening, like that theme. I actually like that. But in terms of like the music overall in Mighty Number 9, it's really not the most memorable. That's not to say it's bad, but there's no other tune other than the pan flute theme that really ever stuck with me. I mean, there was that rap song that plays during the credits, which I guess, according to Johnny, I don't know. Some call me Johnny, I should say. I mean, I don't know if it's hyperbole or not, but he said that it's 4 hours long. I can't imagine sitting there watching credits for 4 hours, but yeah, as far as the music is concerned, aside from like the cool rap song with like the solo about Mighty Number 9 and the pan flute theme that plays kind of throughout the game, honestly, it doesn't really make much of an impression. Most of the time I spend just kind of like focusing on the game and all that fun stuff. But I mean, am I disappointed? No. Am I? Yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't really feel like that's something that they were really putting a lot of emphasis on, I guess. Maybe. I don't know. I don't want to insult anybody. I may have already done that. But for the most part, the music is what it is. It exists, and that's all I can really say, unfortunately. So Mega Man 11's story is along the lines of any other Mega Man game in the series. The past 12 games, right? There's 11 games before Mega Man 11. Mega Man 11 is technically the 12th in the mainline series. It's pretty much the same. The only difference is that there's an origin story. There's a little bit of history, a little backstory between Dr. Light and Dr. Wowie, and the origin of their conflict. Dr. Light wants to give robots independent thought, and Dr. Wily wants to integrate this double gear system, which Dr. Light is totally against. For whatever reason. Well, no, the reason is because it puts too much strain on a robot's systems. And, I mean, that's kind of interesting because giving robots independent thought kind of leads to the whole, like, Reploid Maverick Wars in the future. And after that, even, like, so much wrong happens because of Dr. Light's whole like idea of the independent thought thing that reaches centuries after he dies. So I'm not entirely sure why Dr. Light, it almost feels like Dr. Light's being shoehorned into being framed as like this amazing guy. This story makes Dr. Light look worse, cuz all the Double Gear system does really is temporarily boost a robot's abilities to perform, right? And Dr. Light even uses it on auto. I mean, not only does he use it on Mega Man for the game, but he also afterwards uses it on auto. So like there is a real utility there. Robots are devices that humans use to make work easier for them. And so the Double Gear system is actually, it makes sense in a robot application. Whereas the independent thought thing leads to wars and lots of death and destruction and apocalypses. Bruh, by the time we get to Mega Man Legends, most of the world is water, bruh. Come on, man. Honestly, this whole story really does make Dr. Light out to be kind of a villain. But, like, you're working for him, so I don't know. It's just kind of like they should have found a different way, I think. I don't know if that's what they wanted to frame it as, but as far as like Dr. Light is concerned, he's always supposed to be like, I mean, he was never a guy of high virtue or anything. He's just a robot creator who's facing off against another robot creator. That's kind of like the story as it went. But now we have this whole like moral thing going on. He's morally opposed to Double Gear systems because of the strain it puts on robots. But if robots don't have independent thought and therefore are incapable of feeling, then the only concern you would have about putting additional strain on a machine is that the machine will just wear out faster. It's not like it will feel anything or suffer. So this is kind of like, I don't know if paradoxical is the right word, but the more you think about it, the more this whole backstory kind of falls apart, and the more, again, of a villain the good guy is supposed to be. And, the best thing you can do at this point is to just not think about it. Just ignore it, let it go, and move on, But from a story perspective, Mega Man 11 does have a little bit of it feels a little bit undercooked, I suppose, in that regard. But I will say, when it comes to the integration of the story into gameplay, which we'll get to shortly, I think that's actually better. Better done, or at least it's done in a way that makes better sense than what the backstory does and introduces into the world of Mega Man here. So, there's that. As far as graphics are concerned, Mega Man 11 looks great. I really like everything about it, honestly. The art direction is exactly as you would expect from a Mega Man game. It's very fitting. The 2.5D style, personally, I always thought, if you're going to have a 2D playing game, then, 2D sprites are perfectly fine. And more often than not, I kind of prefer that. But as far as the 2.5D style that's being employed here, I think it actually looks really good. It's an incredible looking game. And I mean, this game came out in 2018, and I know a lot of other games were like kind of putting this out of the way, pushing it out of the way, big AAA releases and all that stuff. But I don't know, Mega Man 11 still looks amazing, and I love the lighting effects. I love the character animations, little things too, like the way Mega Man recovers from a charge shot, or from the effects, the visual effects of the double gear system, even the look of the heads-up display, the life bar and the energy bars and everything like that. It all looks really cool. It's kind of like a retro sort of thing, but it looks modern at the same time. It scales really well, I guess. And the animations of the enemies, the bosses, I really like how the game slows down when you defeat a boss at first. Actually, it kind of reminds me of the first Mega Man game in that regard. There's like that pause, and then they blow up, basically. And it kind of brings that back, but in a more, I guess you could say, artistic kind of way. And because of that, I ended up really liking that. And there's really no complaint about the graphics here. I think this game looks incredible. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about that. Gameplay. So, here's gameplay. Gameplay is actually really interesting. Again, a lot of people are just going to say, oh, this is just another Mega Man game. Running, jumping, blasting, and sliding occasionally. And yes, that is all here. But there is so much more than just that. With Mega Man 11, there is the double gear system. It is a story thing that is implemented in gameplay. Obviously, it's taken from gameplay and kind of they make a story around it. But this is an integral part of this game, the double gear system. You have two gears, a speed gear and a power gear. And you can activate those gears separately or together sometimes. Well, you can activate them together, but that kind of like, it's a little shifty. But you can activate those gears individually or together, and it will do, well, according to the name of the gear. The speed gear is incredibly useful in almost every conceivable application. Basically, it slows down speed. Or it slows down enemies, basically, so that you can, not just enemies, but obstacles too, so that you can move through them or navigate platforming challenges more efficiently. Or if there's a little bit of a time crunch, like let's say there's an instant death trap moving towards you from one side of the screen that you need to stay away from, and you kind of lost your pace and it's catching up to you. That little blue gear, that speed gear, activating that will more likely than not help you a bunch. Now, there is a complaint, of course, that if you use the speed gear stock, it is a little bit gimped because of the fact that it also slows you down a little bit. It makes everything slow motion, including you, significantly. But there is an upgrade you can buy, which I will talk about a little bit later, that fixes that and makes it both more useful and in some very limited cases less useful. But we'll get there later. The power gear is one that takes a little bit of getting used to, at least for me. Basically, the power gear doesn't make you more powerful. It doesn't give like your lemons or your charged shots more damage or space that it takes up. It doesn't really do that. Instead, what it does is it gives you something like, well, the rapid shot. If you know the classic Mega Man games 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, and 10, then you will remember that there's a rapid fire that you can do that lets you shoot 3 lemons on the screen really quickly at once, basically. And that's sort of what the power gear kind of does. I guess you could say it's sort of taking away a stock power that Mega Man has and sort of reintroducing it in like an arbitrary externalized kind of way, I suppose. But it is pretty cool, and it makes it more difficult to abuse that. Also, when you fire a charge shot, it actually lets you fire 2, one after the other. When you fire, so you get 2 for 1, basically, which can be helpful, but timing is key. The power gear is, I think, meant specifically for boss fights, especially boss fights like, all of the Robot Master, all of the boss fights, but especially what comes to mind is the Yellow Devil, and that's the Yellow Devil, ironically or unironically, is the first boss in my playthrough that I actually was able to successfully use the power gear to defeat. But so I guess that's like the star example for me. However, if you are able to get the power gear and use it to its most effective ability, then you will find that it will help you walk through bosses pretty quickly, honestly, and with relative ease. And honestly, it's pretty cool. I like the power gear, but not as much as the speed gear. I think the speed gear is OP. And one of the tricky things about the power gear is that the blast actually does kind of push you back a little bit, but well, let's talk about Auto's parts shop. So it's not just Auto, it's also Roll. Basically, Roll allows you to buy a number of different things, including energy tanks, weapon tanks, mystery tanks, a damage modifier that halves the amount of damage that you take during battle. It lets you get Beat, and his name isn't Richard, but that's what I'm going to call him, and lives, among other things. Auto gives you parts or chips that help to upgrade Mega Man's abilities, his strengths and whatnot. And those can be anything from spike shoes to new suspension, which limits the amount of recoil that he takes when he does a charge shot. And part of that also means strengthening the double gear system, because the thing is, Mega Man is given Dr. Wily's like ancient double gear prototype that Dr. Light stole from Wily. You can't make this up. All right. Anyway, so yeah, and so because of that, it's a little bit nerfed compared to what Dr. Wily is using. So in order to augment its abilities, you can get a couple of upgrades for it that help you to make it even more usable than it already is. So for the speed gear, that makes it so that when you slow down everything around you, you actually maintain your stock speed so you can go even faster, which is incredibly helpful. And with the power gear, I actually don't know what the power gear 1 does. I forgot. But honestly, the power gear 1 isn't exactly that useful. I don't know. I never got any use from it. I just ended up getting it. Then again, I got it at the end of the game, so I didn't get the chance to really play around with it, I suppose. But yeah, you have those upgrades, and you also have things like energy distributors and then an advanced energy distributor that lets you recharge your weapon energy. And honestly, you go through weapon energy pretty quickly in this game, but it doesn't really matter that much because you'll end up honestly just opting for the stock Mega Buster and the speed and power gears, honestly. This game really wants you to use those. And so you use them, and it's very helpful. One of the most helpful chips that I got, aside from the anti-knockback chip, which is endlessly useful, is the chip that auto-charges your Mega Buster. At first, I didn't know what to think about it. I was like, is that going to really be useful? But I ended up getting it anyway on my first playthrough ever, which isn't what I ended up recording because that was rough. But I ended up getting that, and it was so useful. You don't have to worry about holding down the square button in order to charge your weapon, your Mega Buster. And that's just, it's so nice. It is so nice to be able to not have to worry about having to hold that down and charge or whatever. It'll just charge automatically. All you have to worry about is running, jumping, sliding, and shooting. And it's just great. Another cool thing that this game introduces is sort of like this stun ability. It's one of my favorite things to do. Where in Mega Man, you'll know that there are a lot of enemies out there that have shields that protect themselves and only reveal themselves briefly to take a pot shot at you when you're not looking, right? So that's Sniper Joe, and that's the little turret dudes, especially in this game. Well, there is a counter to that, and that is if you hit them with a charge shot, that will actually push them back a little bit. It'll make them vulnerable, and they won't shoot at you. They'll just kind of like be stunned for a second. And that's your time to strike. The best combo to do for that is charge shot, hit. As soon as they get stunned, speed gear, blast them into oblivion. It is so satisfying to be able to do that. It just, chef's kiss. It's just amazing. I did it every single time I could. And every time it was as great as ever. As far as Rush is in this game, Rush makes his grand reappearance after a while, I guess. I mean, he was in Mega Man 9 and 10. But in this game, his role is more along the lines of his role in, like, Mega Man 8. He's there. And, I mean, not the most helpful. I mean, you can use the Rush Jet and the Rush Coil to kind of get yourself out of sticky situations, or perhaps to, if you're too early on in the game, to be able to jump to a certain height or whatever. You can use that, the Rush Coil to get up there early on and stuff, and it's fine, but you don't really worry so much about Rush abilities unless you really can't be bothered with some platforming challenges. Personally, only when I'm feeling lazy do I ever try to do the Rush Jet, but even then, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes I can't be bothered, but other times I'm like, yeah, I can't be bothered to use Rush even more, so I might as well just do the thing. So, it is what it is. But one of the interesting things is that Rush is always equipped by default. So he's basically just mapped to a hotkey. At first, all you have is the Rush Coil, though. You get Rush Jet about halfway through your campaign. But Rush Coil has a hotkey. It's for me, I mapped it to triangle. And then the Rush Jet I matched to circle. But that's not the default layout. And trust me, we'll get to the controls in a second. But it is really cool. It doesn't break the pace at all. It's kind of... honestly, it's pretty innovative for Mega Man gameplay. It's about as innovative as when Mega Man X introduced flicking through the weapons, the special weapons with the shoulder buttons. It's literally like that. Like, how did they not think about this before? But of course, with that also comes, again, yeah, but Rush isn't really that necessary. So, you take what you can get, though, right? If there is a Mega Man 12 on the horizon, or at some point, maybe they'll find other ways to integrate Rush into the level design or whatever, or not. I mean, you've never really needed Rush as much, except for in like Mega Man 7 and 6 with the armors, or 3, honestly. Okay. So you needed the Rush Jet quite often. You needed Rush quite often in the previous games. All right, fine. You don't really need him here, just like in Mega Man 8, and really in like Mega Man 9 and 10 too, perhaps. But like, it is what it is. Rush, he's there if you want him. Kind of limited, but not the worst incarnation of Rush. I'll say that. Not the worst. we do have mini bosses in this game, and the mini bosses are just as you would expect for Mega Man. Actually, they're actually more interesting. In some cases, some of these mini bosses remind me of some of the Wily stage bosses from earlier games, especially from like Mega Man 7. I don't know why, but some of these bosses kind of remind me of the turtle boss in Mega Man 7, which is one of my favorite bosses actually in any Mega Man game. That might sound weird, but yeah. And yeah, the mini bosses are pretty cool. Once you get their patterns down and you're able to avoid their attacks and deal the damage that you can, honestly, those bosses are pretty fun, pretty cool, and appropriately challenging. So, as far as the gameplay in Mega Man 11 is concerned, there's really very little I have to complain about because, everything is exactly how it always has been. I mean, yeah, of course, you have the instant death sort of, beginner's trap spike courses that you have to go through and stuff. And the speed gear, if you upgrade it, is not going to help you through them. You do have some tricky platforming, but honestly, at this point, if you're going to complain about the difficulty of the spikes in Mega Man 11, then I mean, have you not played Mega Man X6 or Mega Man 9 or Mega Man 10? Like, it's so much more mild, so to speak. It's not abused nearly as much as in other Mega Man games that I honestly don't see. I mean, if you're going to complain about spikes, then you can have your complaint. It's fine, but personally, there are far worse games out there, and I know that's kind of a weak counter argument to that, but at the same time, I mean, it's so inoffensive, and once you get the technique down to bypassing these spike traps, it's really not that big a deal. It might seem like it at first, it might seem insurmountable, but really, it's simpler. You're overthinking it. It's a lot simpler than you think it is. So, I don't know. I guess it really depends on taste, I suppose. Maybe on like an easier difficulty, it won't be that bad. There is a power-up that allows you to land on spikes one time, though. There is a power-up that allows you to do that. So if you really hate spikes and you want that extra edge over them, consider that power up. I didn't get it my second playthrough. I did get it for my first, although I only managed to use it one time and I got an achievement for that. But yeah, honestly, the most useful Eddie is his name. Going back to the buddies here, Beat is also really helpful. I've only ever used him once, at least 3 times across both my playthroughs, but one time on my most recent one that I recorded for my Let's Play. And to be honest, Beat is probably the most helpful. I've never used Eddie. I know that's kind of like, maybe that makes for an incomplete review, but I've never felt it necessary to ask Eddie to show up and give me an item in the middle of a level or anything like that. But he is there, and you can only carry one of them at first, but you can actually upgrade that so you can carry 3. So that's nice. So Beat will pretty much save you after you've fallen down a bottomless pit by mistake. But of course you have to be careful because he will get tired and he will just kind of drop you where you are if you dilly-dally for too long. But I've never had any problems with that or anything. Beat is incredibly useful in that way, which helps, again, give you that extra edge or that extra chance that you feel like you might be due because of a stupid split-second mistake that you made, that you jumped in the wrong direction, or you flaked out in the middle of a jump and thought you could make it back to your, that sort of thing. So, Beat is really helpful in that regard. And The damage reducer, I know I'm like jumping around here, but there's just so much to talk about. With the damage reduction, that's really helpful. It works the same way as it did in Mega Man 9 and 10, and in case you don't know, you haven't played those games, basically it reduces the amount of damage enemies do to you by half, but it only lasts for one level. So once you've used it, it's gone until you buy another one. And that's kind of annoying. It would be nice to be able to stock up on that. Well, no, one level or one life, whatever comes first. I forgot to, yeah, that's how it works. One level or one life, whichever one comes first. And as soon as you die or you complete the level, that effect wears off completely. You got to buy a new one. Again, it just kind of adds the extra step of having to go and buy a new one. Oh, but how do you buy items, Jaku? Well, I'm glad you asked. Have you played Mega Man 7? If you played Mega Man 7, then you already know. This is paid for by screws or bolts or whatever you want to call them. You give Otto the screws and bolts, and he will manufacture for you the thing that you want. Or Roll. Roll will do it too. You know, Roll does items, and Otto does the parts. But yeah, it works the same. You have that in-game currency, and basically those are dropped by enemies, and you use that to pay for stuff. That's something that has gone on since Mega Man 7 through 8, 9, 10, and now 11. I'm going to assume Mega Man and Base. So, yeah, the only difference, of course, is Mega Man 8 doesn't drop. The enemies don't drop those bolts, but I'm not going to go into that because that's Mega Man 8. But the point still stands. These screws or bolts, whatever you want to call them, they're kind of essential if you want to buy upgrades. Energy tanks are dirt cheap. You can get them very easily. Weapon tanks also. Lives, you can hold up to 9 lives, although I don't really understand the implementation of lives, seeing as how game overs really don't do anything except boot you out of the level. So, maybe the next Mega Man game they can just do away with lives. I don't know. Well, again, checkpoints. Johnny, some call me Johnny, mentioned that checkpoints are a little too sparse for his liking. They're too spaced out. I kind of have to disagree with that. I don't think I ever had any real issues with checkpoints being too far back. I think every level has a midpoint, much like Mega Man 8, and that's where the checkpoint is. And so it might just be that it's not a question of spaced, like checkpoints that are too far spaced out, but more so that you spent more time than was necessary in one part of the stage, died, and then went back and kind of tricked yourself into believing that you got sent back further than you actually were. So, well, you know, different strokes for different folks, I suppose, but for me, I never encountered any issues with checkpoints being too spaced out in this game or anything like that. Weapon utility in this game is, honestly, I don't really know, if I'm going to be honest. I never really used weapons that much because the double gear system sort of renders them redundant, if not superfluous, entirely. They are really useful used in combination with the double gear system against bosses, especially robot masters. But generally speaking, as far as like general utility within the levels themselves against regular enemies, I mean, I know you can do some really cool things with like the acid barrier and all that, and like the bomb. And I know in the Torchman stage, you can freeze the wall of fire that chases you, so that you can get like a real big head start on it. But honestly, I didn't find them to be as useful as they were in like Mega Man 9, which I know is kind of a high bar to set because Mega Man 9's weapons are essential for that game. But generally speaking, as far as like the bosses are concerned, they work absolutely perfectly. And I can't really ask any more of that from that, because honestly, up until I was forced to use weapons in Mega Man 9, for the most part, aside from some rare cases here and there in like Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 7 maybe, I never really felt the need to use special weapons to bypass certain obstacles or enemies more efficiently. So I have always kind of opted for the stock weapon, the lemons, the Mega Buster, that sort of thing. So I don't really have any real comments about weapon utility, except they're kind of unnecessary unless you're fighting bosses. But even then, mini bosses and Wily bosses, Dr. Wily himself, MMHP is one of my favorite sources for Mega Man content, and on MMHP, the author suggests that against the first stage of Wily, you use the acid barrier. I had horrible luck with the acid barrier, so I just used the Mega Buster, and I was able to get through the first part of the Wily boss, the Wily machine, extremely easy. And I didn't even use the power gear. I used the speed gear even just a couple of times. So honestly, the Mega Buster is much more potent in this game than it might be in previous games. So really, you use the weapons that you want to at your discretion when you want to, but generally speaking, you're not going to get as much global utility out of them as you might want them to, if that's sort of your style of playing through Mega Man games, especially the Torchman. Torchman is probably the most useless because you just shoots up and then down at like a diagonal angle right in front of you. And it's just, even with the power gear, they just get a little bigger and it shoots 3 of them at certain like acute angles just slightly in front of you. I don't really like that power up that much, or like the electric power up that only hugs the floor and the ceiling. Really only good for one boss in my opinion. There is the Blizzard, it's not Blizzard Man, but that's what I'm going to call it, that Blizzard Tornado that you can get that'll freeze things, but it really, you use that with the power gear against Torchman, you just stand in the middle of the arena and blast them. That's pretty much how you deal with that. But it makes mincemeat out of the Robot Masters. For me, that's all it really needs to do. So, whatever. Again, I know I went way too long about that, and maybe I've repeated myself a few times, but yeah, weapons, not the best, not the worst. They're there, they work, they're perfectly effective against the bosses who are weak against them. So there's that. The bouncy ball is probably the most effective weapon in the whole game. Just gonna throw that out there. Controls. All right, Mega Man 11, I have a bone to pick with you. All right, so I'm sorry if I'm behaving a little bit extremely here. And this isn't an act, by the way. So, Mega Man 11, the default control is so unintuitive. And it's even, you can edit it, which is fine. But it's still not what I want from a Mega Man game. So let me, I'm holding right now my DualSense PS5 controller that I use to play video games on my computer. All right, so we have this beautiful, nice, and kind of dusty and needs to be cleaned PS5 controller. All right, so how do you use it for Mega Man 11? Here's the default, button placement sort of thing, or, button mapping. So, how do you jump? All right, well, in past Mega Man games, I'll say, I don't know, since the PS1 era, right? You jump with X. That's the X on a PlayStation controller. So that would be like A on an Xbox controller, or B if you're on a Nintendo controller, right? And then to shoot is square, right? Square. Or if you're on an Xbox controller, that's X. Or if you're on a Nintendo controller, that's Y. Not an NES, but Super Nintendo or later, right? Or a Switch, or that, right? BY. Okay? I'm looking at my Wii Classic controller. Just make sure, just verify, all right? So you got that, right? And then you use the D-pad to move. And then you can, from the Mega Man X games, you can flick through your weapons with the shoulder buttons, right? Now, one of the cool things about Mega Man 11 is that if you want to use a speed gear, it's the right trigger, or R2. If you want to use a power gear, it's the left trigger, L2. Pretty cool, right? But here's where things blow up. All right, so you got these controllers, right? The jump button isn't X. You know what it is? It's circle. So that would be the A button on a Nintendo controller, or B on an Xbox controller, okay? And then you shoot with X. That would be B on a Nintendo controller, or A on an Xbox controller. Make sense of that. That's the default button mapping, and it gets worse. Well, I don't know if it gets worse, but something that bothers me is that you cannot use a D-pad to move your controller, or to move your character at all. You cannot. I tried to put the movement onto the D-pad. No, you have to use the analog stick. Now, this isn't game breaking. You can change the button. The buttons are game breaking, but luckily you can change those. You can edit those, and you bet I did change it to the way it should be. But the analog control is not optimal either, specifically for precision reasons. Look, I'm not against analog control, obviously. Analog is fantastic for 3D games, especially, right? But if you're playing a 2D platformer, you don't need that 360. Well, actually, oh yeah, no, that is 300. Duh. Yeah, you don't need that 360-degree analog control, right? It's again, to pull out my $150 word, superfluous. The D-pad for this kind of game in particular is much more optimal, because there's precision in a game that requires, get this, precision. I know, it's crazy. So when you have to slide in any Mega Man game, to slide, you hold down and then press jump to slide, right? Now, if you're playing the Mega Man Anniversary Collection, there's actually a hotkey for that. You can just press, if you're playing it on GameCube, you press, X, right? I think it's X, because Y is the rapid fire, right? You press X, and that's like a hotkey, which is great because, you're not using the D-pad on a GameCube controller for anything. All right. But if you're playing on a PlayStation controller, you don't need that hotkey because, oh, look at that. The D-pad is perfect for that kind of thing, right? The problem with the analog stick, of course it's doable, but because the analog stick kind of floats, right? It's not four ways, just like up, down, left, right. It's like up, but also a little bit to the side, or, to the side, but a little bit down, In order to get that down, you have to make sure you're pushing it down, but sometimes when you're in the heat of things, maybe it's off to the left a little bit, and then you press the jump button, you end up jumping instead of sliding, and you're like, oh, what the bro? I didn't want to do that, but it's making me, now I'm in a death loop. And that's the blow up, okay? I would not be able to imagine, actually, no, I can't imagine, because I've actually done it, played like Mega Man 7 with the analog control, because, again, You're not using the D-pad on the Anniversary Collection for GameCube. You're just not going to. I mean, it's the option is there, and I thank Capcom for the thought. It's really the thought that counts, I suppose. But at the same time, that thought is kind of done away with by the unusability of that D-pad for practical reasons, I suppose. But like, I don't understand why Capcom was allergic to the D-pad. Well, then again, I have to add this caveat because this is important. This game was made for PS4, Xbox One, Switch, that sort of thing, right? It predates the PS5. So maybe there is an incompatibility, right? Because I'm using the Steam input, so there could be incompatibilities. All right, there's my little asterisk there, but it makes life difficult anyway, right? And that's the thing that blows me up. Maybe if I played it with a PS4 controller, it would have been perfect. It may as well have been. But I can't see how much different. Well, because I'm not a programmer, I can't see how much could be different from, going from a PS4 controller to a PS5 controller. But I don't know. Maybe I'm most likely missing something. But I mean, it's just kind of annoying, especially. So another thing that bothers me is that the PS5 has the controller has this fantastic touchpad that clicks on two different sides, including the middle, right? So really in 3 sections. And the right side is start, the left side is select, and the middle one is, I think, also start, right? Which is great. I love it, right? It's really cool. And the way it goes, I've never had any problems with that particular input style, because the start and select buttons, like where they are, I know that's not what they're called, but I'm going to call them that. Where they are currently is just kind of weird. They're a little too small, and they take more force than you would think in order to actually get a click out of them. And so it's kind of, I always opt for the touchpad because it's just like, oof, there it is, perfect, right? Quick, easy, effective, and you don't have to be like so precise. It's just reach for the middle of the controller and press. There you go. Perfect. It's so ergonomic. It's fantastic. Probably the best controller ever made, honestly. If we're going to be real here. But this game doesn't take advantage of that. Instead, the left and right sides of this move Mega Man left and right. So it acts like the D-pad. Oh, yeah, it acts like the D-pad, right? So the only way you can get start and select is by pressing these small buttons. I don't know. I tried to remap it, but it just didn't. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I'm too stupid to figure it out. That could very well be the case, but it's just out of the box. No other game, not even other Mega Man games. I'll get there. But not even other Mega Man games, the Mega Man Legacy collections or anything. It's still running in Steam input mode. No problems. No, you don't have to even think. It just works. And I have no idea why it doesn't work for Mega Man 11. It just doesn't make any sense. But here we are, complaining about it, I guess. But again, obviously it didn't get too much in the way of the game because, I was able to beat it. I beat it twice with this input, changing nothing. Luckily, it does save your control preferences between saves, which, I would expect, but I played my fair share of broken games before, so my standards are pretty low. So, there's that to consider. But generally speaking, I have some issues with the controls for this game, but when you set it up to your preferences, it works fine enough. I just wish I could change from the analog. Analog works for like 2D Sonic games, It just doesn't work for this kind of game in my opinion. I just can't get over it. Maybe it'll become a meme. Maybe enough people will watch this, it'll just be a meme. It's like, ooh, D-pad master race or something like that. Comment that if you made it this far. Oh man. So the music in Mega Man 11 is so weird. Not the music itself, but like my experience of the music is bizarre. So I grew up playing the Mega Man games through the Mega Man Anniversary Collection on GameCube. That's where I had beaten all of the original games from 1 to 8, and I rebeat them over and over again, and it was really fun. I have a lot of memories from that time, and whenever I hear those tunes from those original games, it always takes me back. If you watch my earlier Let's Plays of the earlier Mega Man games, I'm like, oh man, this song is so great, that sort of thing. And I'm hit with a similar, not the same, but a very similar sense of nostalgia by the soundtrack in Mega Man 11 without having any real nostalgia for Mega Man 11 at all. Literally just got this game and played it for the first time, and I'm already hit with nostalgia. Why is that? And I mentioned this a few times in my Let's Play, but basically the musical direction here is kind of like a electronic, like techno, whatever you want to call it, that style of music. And honestly, it's gotten pretty popular to utilize in 2D games. I think Sonic uses it a lot now too. So, it's kind of bog standard to, in that regard. But what makes it special is that the specific style, the specific electronica style that they take with this reminds me a lot of a specific YouTuber, and that is a YouTuber called Frequency. He was never really the biggest gaming YouTuber. Back in the day, he was one of the bigger ones. Nowadays, not really, because he went on a bunch of hiatuses and all that fun stuff. Life gets in the way. You got to prioritize that over YouTube, especially when you're not making money and it's a hobby, blah, blah, blah. Fine, I get it. However, despite all that, he used to have these lit openings for his videos. And these videos were always tracks, these electronica tracks. This was from a time when I hated anything that wasn't metal, but I would watch these videos and these intros were just awesome. I mean, sure, they're just kind of a mosaic of, different gameplay of previous games that he had reviewed the year before. Yeah, but the music that he chose for it was just so cool, because in the time when everybody was doing like some kind of like weird dubstep kind of intro thing for their videos, he was using like this cool, really kind of melodic electronica stuff that apparently were ripped from games that he played, like Frequency and Amplitude on the PS2. Two games I didn't even know existed. And that's where his channel namesake is Frequency. And so listening to this music kind of brings me back to watching his old videos and those intros, and that's where the nostalgia comes from. So it really is just like this 5-layer burrito of, wow, this is nostalgia sort of thing. And I kind of have a soft spot for that, I suppose. I mean, otherwise it wouldn't really be much to write home about, maybe. I mean, some of it's really cool, kind of catchy. I find myself singing along with it in my head long after the game, I've shut off the game or whatever. So that's something. They're kind of earwormy, although I wouldn't be able to necessarily, point one out as being like, yes, I that's a great tune or anything like that, but it'll just bring back instead this kind of vague, like, yes, memories from high school sort of thing. And I guess that's all I really need. So, yeah. So, when it comes to comparing the stories here, this is kind of difficult in terms of who did it better, because they're kind of similar in a way. Specifically when it comes to the protagonists. I'm not talking about Beck or Megaman. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about Dr. White and Dr. Light and Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Wily. Because you kind of wonder who really is the villain here. You know, it really wants to paint... Well, Mega Man 11 really wants to paint Dr. Light as, like, infallible, the greatest, whatever. He's great. He's got, you know, the morals and all that fun stuff. But I guess Dr. White, it's a little bit gray, the morality there. But Dr. White is still insisted upon being like this almost infallible, perfect genius, right? And he's a good guy, and he created the good guy robot that takes out the bad guy robot, which admittedly is his own creation. But, you know, it kind of cancels out because he made the guy that beat the guy that he made that was a bad guy, right? So, whatever. But it's ambiguous, I suppose. Granted, I will say that while Mega Man 11, while it does give a little bit of backstory and, you know, at the end of the day, it does sort of rehash sort of an old story that goes on in Mega Man. It's kind of a meme, you know. I don't know how many times a Mega Man game can make fun of Dr. Wily pleading and begging for mercy at the end of the final boss before, you know, before it gets, even that becomes a meme in and of itself, right? And so there is a bit of repetition with the story there. It's not really that necessary to just, you know, play the game, right? At least with Mighty Number 9, it's also not an imperfect story, but at the very least, what it lacks in certain characters and motivations and sort of what it does to blur morality and ethics and robots and all that stuff. At the very least, it does introduce somewhat of an interesting curveball story, you know, with the whole fact that, you know, Beck isn't trying to destroy robots, he's just trying to reassimilate them back into not being crazy and trying to take over the world, including the final boss. So, you know, because assimilation is sort of just like the whole theme of this game. It's the whole goal of this game and all the characters in it. So that integration into the gameplay, I think, fits more seamlessly into it than something like the double gear system, because obviously the double gear system was a gameplay mechanic first and then turned into a story element later, whereas this in Mighty Number 9 seems to sort of seamlessly fit those things together very nicely. And so, you know, despite whatever issues I might have with its story, I think Mighty Number 9 is a little bit more creative and does a better job of seamlessly integrating elements of the story and the themes of the game into the gameplay itself. So this round goes to Mighty Number 9. So it would be easy for a lot of people to just say, oh, well, between Mighty Number 9 and Mega Man 11, Mega Man 11 is a better looking game, blah, blah, blah. Better graphics and all that stuff. It would be easy to say that just because, like, oh, well, you know, Mighty Number 9, you know, pizza explosions. And, you know, I want to make a case for Mighty Number 9 if I can. Well, I guess I already kind of have. Mighty Number 9 isn't like the most cutting edge looking game of all time. Okay, fine. You know, now one could argue, of course, that this game was released on the PS3, Xbox 360, and Wii U. And, you know, because of that, compared to Mega Man 11, which came out on PS4, Xbox One, Switch, PC, that of course it's going to look better because they were working with more powerful hardware. So these are kind of a generation of hardware apart. That I think there's a case that can be made for that. I don't know if you could get Mega Man 11 going on the PS3 or 360 or the Wii U. Well, maybe the Wii U. Well, now that I think about it, they got it on the Switch. So, okay. There is a difference, though, right? They aren't completely one-to-one the same. Mighty Number 9 is actually kind of at an angle, kind of similar to Mega Man 7 in a way. Mega Man 7, I think it's a 7. It's either 7 or 8. There's like depth that you can see on the floor, right? And that's the case with Mighty Number 9, not so much with Mega Man 11, at least not that I'm aware of. And because of that, your angle of attack, or just like because of that, things will look kind of differently. The perspective of the camera is different. It's slightly different, right? Of course, things in Mega Man 11 still have depth, but there are a lot of times when enemies, or even Mega Man himself, things that show up on screen, you kind of wonder, are those 3D? Are those, polygonal? Or are those sprites? Really good-looking sprites, but sprites nonetheless. It kind of really, treads that line because of what the angle of attack kind of allows it to be. Whereas with Mighty Number 9, it's very clear that everything almost the vast majority of the assets on screen are 3D, including character models and enemies and even levels, right? And so it is kind of tricky because you also have the difference in art direction. Mighty Number 9 is going for obviously a different art style than Mega Man 11 is. Of course, Mighty Number 9 doesn't want to be just another Mega Man game, obviously, artistically. So, of course, they're not going to go for a Mega Man art style. They're going to go for something different, something, even if it's slight, right? I mean, Beck doesn't really have a lot in common with Mega Man other than the fact that there's some blue in his costume and maybe his face. But, aside from that, you have to think about the art style also. Keeping all those things in mind, I have to say, there are some interesting graphical effects in place in Mighty Number 9, of course, like some lighting stuff, but a lot of that is sort of textured in. I think it's not real time. It doesn't really seem to have much of an effect on Beck himself, and that again could be the result of more limited hardware, although at the same time I can also argue that they had techniques to at least fake it on consoles as far back as the 5th generation, with the Sega Saturn, N64, PS3 all had their little ways of faking it. I think the N64 could do real-time lighting effects, so if I remember correctly, but it didn't matter because there were ways you could fake it, right? And so because of that, there is kind of the first hit against the presentation in Mighty Number 9. Pizza explosions, while not as common as some naysayers would like to have you believe it is, they still exist, and they still are pretty rough to look at. They're kind of low resolution. They look like big pieces, giant, not even pieces of pizza, just whole pizzas, Not all of the explosions, though. There are some really cool explosion effects later on in the game. specifically with the second to last boss, the conveyor belt boss. And that was pretty cool. So, there are some redeeming qualities to this game graphically. The color palette is, I think, is as good as it has to be. Quite frankly, I don't think that Mighty Number 9 is like. I think its graphical fidelity or lack thereof is a little bit overblown. Of course, when you compare it to Mega Man 11, it's pretty clear that one is very clearly a crowd-funded, fully 3D, really trying hard to be a AAA game in visuals without quite getting there. And while it does help it in terms of if they leaned into like the cyberpunk aesthetic that they had in like the Highway episode or level, I think that would have been really cool. But of course, that's not what they had intended to do, which is kind of a shame because that would have been really cool. But I get it because it's supposed to be the future. Well, cyberpunk's supposed to be the future. Whatever. Don't think too much about it. But like, when you look at Mighty Number 9, it's like, graphically it's totally fine. I get it. It makes sense. It's reasonably colorful, although again, some of the colors are a little bit for example, when an enemy is glowing blue because they're ready to be assimilated, but the character is already blue, it can be difficult to distinguish between them. And that's kind of, a graphical issue, I suppose. But you look at it and you're like, honestly, it's fine, especially when you consider this game is, 10 years old or so. But then you look at Mega Man 11, which is only 2 years newer. The age difference between them isn't so great, and yet there's an attention to detail, like, again, enemy projectiles affecting the lighting and your own projectiles affecting the lighting. And while I think Mighty Number 9 does have a couple of instances where that's the case, Mega Man 11 is far more consistent with it. And then, of course, you have the cutscenes. The cutscenes in Mighty Number 9 were obviously kind of put together quickly. And you can obviously tell because, characters, there's no lip syncing, and the animations are pretty static, and that could just be time and budget constraints at the end of the day. So, there's only so much they were able to do. It was probably, looking at it, was probably a bit much of an ambitious project in terms of the visuals. I think if they kept it at a 2D game strictly, without like maybe with some 3D assets, but not being 2.5D or trying to, go for significant visual effects or anything like that, I think it probably would have gotten a better reception when it was first released. But I mean, I guess I'm going to be contradicting myself when I say it's out of the question, but I guess it is kind of out of the question that Mega Man 11 is overall just the better looking game. Visually speaking, it just has more vibrancy, and it knows when to mute colors when it needs to. The lighting is, the attention to detail in the visuals of Mega Man 11 is just greater, I guess, than what we get in Mighty Number 9. And I think, again, it's not necessarily a failure of the developer of Mighty Number 9. I think it is just because of a limited time, limited budget, and limited staff compared to what Capcom has at their disposal with Mega Man. I mean, you think about Capcom, you might think, that's an old company, just, they used to make old arcade games and that's it. But like, they make most of, if not the majority of not the majority, but they do make a lot of really culturally relevant games even now, and they continue to do so. So it's not like they have a lot of capital and a lot of resources to work with that unfortunately Concept really didn't have when they were making Mighty Number 9. And I think part of the reason why there was that backlash that it did get was thanks to kind of them over-promising and thereby under-delivering. But I feel like if there was less hype behind it, there would be less of a backlash to it, because really, Mighty Number 9 isn't a bad-looking game. Rough around the edges at some points, sure, but, and again, maybe the Wii U version looked rough or something. I don't know. I played this on PC at like the highest settings across the board, but generally, I don't think it really deserves the hate that it got for its graphical presentation. And I think a lot of it, again, is just due to hype and not delivering on aforementioned hype. So, yeah. But this goes to Mega Man 11 handily. So, yeah, there's that. Gameplay. Oh, this is a hard one, because these games, again, a lot of people say, oh, Mighty Number 9, just another Mega Man game. No. And Mega Man 11, just another Mega Man game? No, not really. I mean, yes, they do follow a similar path. They do follow similar beats in gameplay and direction and all of that. Yes, I know. But they aren't equals. They aren't congruent. They have differences. The biggest difference, of course, is sort of the gameplay elements that they introduce. Mighty Number 9 has the assimilation gameplay, which is kind of huge because it adds to Beck's overall movement, and it leads to upgrades, and it can increase your score and rank if that's something that you like. Get all A ranks, I guess, or just how you get take out enemies. It's the most efficient way to do it. And of course, that's how you defeat bosses, because you can't blow them up. You have to, pimp slap them. So there's a lot involved with these, there's a lot involved with this game, Mighty Number 9, than just, oh, it's another Mega Man game, because that really isn't the case. But as far as Mega Man 11 is concerned, that too isn't really just another Mega Man game. It has a whole other aspect to it, which is the double gear system, which really influences the way you navigate boss fights and platforming challenges and all that fun stuff. So it's going to be difficult to judge between the two, because how do I do it? Like, what's better implemented? They're both implemented as a gameplay element specifically perfectly well. I mean, I guess you could say you could break Beck's assimilation dash. You could just kind of cheese entire levels, I suppose, with it. But, I mean, you could also cheese whole platforming sections with the speed gear too, if you know how to implement it properly. And so, like, where do you go? What do you do? It's kind of like, I don't know, what's better implemented? They're both implemented well. Which one do I like better? Which one do I think is better overall? And if I'm going to be honest, I think this might be, I don't know. Well, it's not just gameplay, that element of gameplay, I guess. I guess as a whole, right? Which one do I prefer to interact with on a gameplay standpoint, right? Mega Man 11 or Mighty Number 9. And, it's still difficult because they each have their own slightly different flavor a similar formula. And even though the flavor is different, like slightly different, it's different enough to where it's like, I don't know. Well, I don't know what it's like asking to choose between, because it's just so out there. I don't know how else to put it, but yeah, this is probably the trickiest part, because I haven't actually made my decision on it yet. Mighty Number 9 has the dash and all the power-ups that you can use, which are sometimes helpful, sometimes not. You can dash, as I've mentioned a million times before. There's no charge, but there's a duck dash. No energy tanks, no upgrades that you can buy separately. It's all stock. Weapons are maybe slightly more useful than Mega Man 11. Mega Man 11 definitely has less useful weapons, in my opinion, just as a whole, but it's kind of mitigated by the fact that you have the power gear. Beck, the weapons kind of have to be more useful, just because, otherwise you're just kind of screwed. Good luck beating some of these bosses without their weakness. But, man, this is hard. This is very difficult, but I think if I had to choose which one to play now, just on a gameplay standpoint, without thinking about issues with control, because trust me, controls are next. I guess I would have to say Mega Man 11, but it's slight. It's a really close race, and the reason why I say Mega Man 11 is because there's always a clear way to keep yourself out of danger. In Mega Man 11, or in Mighty Number 9, there really isn't. And that's sort of like the weakest part of Mighty Number 9, I think, is the fact that, when an enemy, let's say, that takes up the whole screen and is obviously taller than your jump height, charges at you, and there's a wall behind you, and there's no way to dodge them except you just have to take the damage, you have to take the hit. That's kind of, unless I'm doing it wrong, which I don't think I'm pretty sure I'm not. It is kind of a flaw, right? A pretty major one. So, but that's like, at the same time, major, but it only happens like once. So I don't know, man. It's really, it's really, really close in terms of control. But I guess Mega Man 11 has to get this one. So yeah, Mega Man 11. Control. We're on the control part, and this will definitely surprise people, but I went on at length about my issues with the control for Mega Man 11 out of the box, being that it is slightly broken. Well, at least for me. It's not what the Mega Man Legacy collections control like. None of them. And so it was kind of bizarre that Capcom would then, after releasing the Legacy Collection 1 and 2, and then X Legacy Collection 1 and 2, they would also release this and change the control layout completely. It kind of made me wonder, like, why? What's going on, right? And before I made the excuse for them, I kind of played devil's advocate for them. I'm like, well, there's no in-game compatibility for my DualSense controller, right? So, I'm using the Steam input, and, that's not perfect, but it works fine for the most part, right? You can just tweak it, whatever. Mighty Number 9 also doesn't have the out-of-the-box. You probably know exactly where I'm going with this. It doesn't have the out-of-the-box compatibility with the DualSense controller built in. So I'm using the Steam input. Guess what? Didn't change anything. about the button layout, the button mapping for the controls. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. The D-pad actually worked. The touchpad actually worked. The buttons were where they were supposed to be. Yes, we can talk about the weird kind of awkward, switching between weapons interface, the real-time thing. But that honestly there's a workaround for that. So it doesn't really break anything. And no, it doesn't. And while, rush on a hotkey is nice, honestly, control has to go to Mighty Number 9. I mean, it's that simple. Mighty Number 9 out of the box controls better than, or at least has better control compatibility and better controller layout than Mega Man 11 does, which is bizarre. But hey, we live in a bizarre world, am I right? So if I'm looking at this correctly, it's all coming down to music. Because of course it is. Who wins in the music department? The pan flutes or frequency nostalgia? Honestly, if I didn't have the nostalgia for the music in Mega Man 11, I probably would have felt about the same about it as I did with Mighty Number 9. Mighty Number 9's soundtrack is really not the most memorable out there, except for the pan flutes and that one credit song where a guy's rapping about Mighty Number 9 and he makes some, I think, dirty jokes or something like that. Mega Man 11, dang. Yeah, Mega Man 11 has to walk away with this, I think. I think it only makes sense. Yeah, Mega Man 11, its soundtrack isn't the strongest in the series, but, I mean, I just can't get over the musical direction. I really like it. I think I still have the theme of one of the levels stuck in my head, hopelessly. So, yeah, it goes without saying. Mega Man 11 takes the round. And so, with that, at a score of 3-2, Mega Man 11 wins and is the better game, I guess, than Mighty Number 9. To nobody's surprise. No, okay, look, Mighty Number 9 is not that bad, I don't think. I genuinely believe that there's a really, really good game in here. But because it had to be rushed out and it wasn't necessarily the most polished product and it wasn't the most finished, we got something decent, honestly. It's not that bad, and it does hang with Mega Man 11, I think. At least from a gameplay perspective. It's not, there are issues, but there are a lot of really similar gameplay elements in Mighty Number 9 that are in Mega Man 11, like especially the weather, the wind blowing stuff. One is used, and they're both utilized in a very similar way. So stuff like that, or ice physics, all that stuff. It's not that they one isn't astronomically better than the other. It just so happens that when you break it down, Mega Man 11 is able to edge out Mighty Number 9, and I think it mostly has to do with just the fact that Capcom has so much in the way of resources to comfortably enough outdo Mighty Number 9. A smaller third-party kind of indie studio like Concept that, it almost seems like a no-brainer that Mega Man 11 would come out on top in a contest like this. But really, there's a lot about Mighty Number 9 that I actually ended up liking. some of the utility of these weapons in terms of being able to platform or the way you interact with certain objects within stages. Maybe a little esoteric at times, but generally, like, when you know how to use them, it's kind of cool to, I don't know, experiment with them. And I think that's the big part about Mighty Number 9. Mega Man 11, of course, has its own stuff. And, both of these games have replay value in terms of, the challenge modes that they offer. And I don't know, man. I think both of these are, I mean, if you want Mega Man 11, but you don't mind a little bit of a visual downgrade and, you just want a Mega Man game on a budget, Mighty Number 9 is not a bad deal, I think, personally. I mean, maybe it's because I was never a backer. I never got behind the Kickstarter project or followed the hype or anything like that. Heck, I didn't even know Keiji Inafune left Capcom. But what he and his team managed to do with Mighty Number 9, I think, is kind of under-celebrated. I really do think Mighty Number 9 has more to it than what people give it credit for. And while I will say at the end of this that Mega Man 11 edges out fairly comfortably, Mighty Number 9 is totally worth your time, I think, if you just keep an open mind and go into it, not expecting the world of it, or, not expecting it to just taking it for what it is. So, yeah. Mega Man 11 wins, but Mighty Number 9 should be given a chance anyway.